Today we're going to be talking about developing your speech. So, when you start putting your speech together, the first thing you're going to need is a general purpose. So, if we're doing an informative, your general purpose is as simple as to inform. If you're doing a persuasive, the simplest process for that is to persuade. Now, if I'm doing an attempt to make you laugh, or just keep you kind of going through my whole story and kind of getting you through everything that you need to get through, I'm doing what's called to entertain. And so these are the different kinds of steps that we actually take in order to kind of get your speech where it needs to go. Well, once you've figured out what your original main purpose for it is, then you need to come up with the general theme. So if you're putting together a speech, and let's just say that I'm doing a speech on the safety of the road, and I'll use my one example I like to use in different speech classes because I'm pretty sure nobody's going to steal it and use it for their own speech. But I like to start off with a story that has something to do with, I don't know, like stuffed animals. And so let's just say, so I start off by telling you a story. And that's usually how most introductions work. I mean, you can start off with a story, you can switch it off to, a statistic, or whatever serves your particular purpose in order to get your speech across. Now, one example that I quite often use in speech classes that I teach is I'll do a story where I say, let's just say one day, my stuffed rabbit, which I don't have in front of me at the moment, but if I did, you'd have a cute little stuffed rabbit. And the stuffed rabbit, his name is Fluffy. And Fluffy likes to have fun. He spends most of his days hanging around the apartment, but then some days he just decides he's going to have his own little fun. Accidentally, I might leave the door open, trying to get some air into the apartment. And on a particular day, Fluffy saw the open door over there, and went, he's never stopped me from doing this before, so I'm going to run out and see what's going on in the rest of the world. So he wanders off into the street, or onto the sidewalk, and he's playing around, doing things that stuffed animals do on their normal day. And so during this process, he starts to get braver and braver, and then he starts to wander off into the street. And next thing, out of nowhere, this huge Mack truck comes by, hits Fluffy, and throws Fluffy all over the place. And Fluffy's got fur coming out of him. It's a horrible story. Anyway, and so I heard the commotion of what was going on outside. My neighbors heard the commotion. They all know Fluffy. So they all run out. They grab Fluffy, and they try to put all the stuffing back into him, and realize it's almost impossible for them to do. So they call the stuffed animal ambulance, and that shows up. Still haven't figured out if it's a stuffed animal itself or if it's just a big truck or ambulance that puts stuffed animals into it. But anyway, not really important to the story. And so anyway, so they rush him to they put him into the ambulance. They rush him off to the hospital, and at the hospital, the doctors try to sew him back together and get all the stuffing that all the neighbors had gathered together and put it into him before they seal it off. And horrible story, right? I mean, good story, but with a horrible kind of an outcome to it. So this starts off my story. Now, obviously, in this story, we're going to eventually lead to like a persuasive topic. This doesn't sound appropriate for, an informative. Like today, I'm going to inform you about how Fluffy got hit by a Mack truck. That's probably not the best way to go about that kind of a story. So what I would then do is say, okay, this is probably a persuasive, and so my eventual point is going to be that Mack trucks are so out of control today, they're hitting stuffed animals that are out playing on the streets and hurting everybody, and so we must do something to take care of that. So anyway, kind of a ridiculous topic, but at the same time, it serves a bunch of different purposes. Now, every speech no matter what kind of speech you do, should have three elements to it. First one is called ethos. And ethos is not just a life insurance company. Ethos is actually the idea of, that leads to ethics, ethos, ethics. And it also leads to your credibility. So if I'm telling you this story, there's a pretty good chance that I have a connection to this particular topic. Either I've done a lot of research on this topic, or I just have had stuffed animals for so long that I'm the person to share this information with you. The second thing you need is what's called logos. Now, this is where you get all of your, detailed information from to show that you've got the background of whatever this particular topic happens to be about. Now, having had stuffed animals is not enough for logos, but had I done lots of research on it, looked into it, did interviews with stuffed animals, all those sorts of things, that leads to what's called logos, which is basically the idea of logic, and it's evidence-based. And the last one, and this is where a lot of students seem to really miss the mark on this one. And this one is called pathos. Pathos, we don't really have a word that matches up with it other than maybe pathological. But the idea of pathos is emotion. And so when I told you this story about Fluffy the stuffed animal, what can quite often happen, and has happened in quite a few of the classes that I've taught, is people get a tie to the original person or character that I'm talking about. So they care about this topic, and they care about, Fluffy. Now, granted, most people are going to, realize Fluffy is a stuffed animal, but at the same time, the way you carry out that information, that you share it with your audience, that builds that bond of trust as to where they will care about this particular topic because it's important to them. So that's why I said that's how you would start your introduction, and then somewhere down towards the remainder of your speech, you'll go back to the original story that you told and then kind of conclude that story. And we call it like a necktie story clincher. And so, but let's talk about some of the things that you do need with an introduction. First off, you need to get the audience's attention. And so whatever kind of story you told will generally do that. In my story, it was a stuffed animal, that's playful and having fun. So people generally kind of care about this particular character, even if most people can argue that he's probably not real, other than just he's a stuffed animal. Right after that, you're going to reveal your topic. So in my story, I told you a story about Fluffy the stuffed animal. So what I would then be saying, my topic has something to do with the idea of safety on the streets, or something to that effect. The third thing you need is revealing the central idea and why it's really important. And the fourth thing you need is establishing your credibility. Like I said, in my persuasive topic, if that's what I was doing it on, my credibility is I've had stuffed animals my entire life, or I've done tons of research on stuffed animals. I'm part of the Stuffed Animal Society, if there is one. And then the fifth thing you need is you need to establish a rapport with your audience. And first off, to make them care about it, I need to know a little bit more about them, and we'll talk about that when we get into later parts of the speech development phase. But those are the 5 main things you need, at least to start off when you're doing your introduction.